Hello everybody, Tim Teacher here, continuing our reading of Obie, Gerbil on the Loose by Michael Delaney. Last time, Obie was tracing the scent of some cheese. Obie could smell the cheese and Obie could not keep herself from going to find out where the cheese was. So Obie went upstairs into the attic and saw the cheese, right? And then right when Obie was about to go to the cheese, something tackled Obie, right, and knocked her onto her back. And it turned out when Obie looked up that it was an old mouse, an elderly mouse. So today we're going to continue on with chapter 20 and chapter 21. Chapter 20 is Mr. Dickens, right, Mr. Dickens. And you can see here, right, there's the elderly old mouse, right, that must be Mr. Dickens. The old mouse was so close to Obie, his face was practically touching hers. He was a very old mouse with grizzled whiskers, white fur on his snout, and a fierce, intense look in his tiny, beady eyes. Obie, terrified, let out a shriek. "Get off me, you creep!" she cried, and pushed the old mouse off her. "Creep!" said the old mouse, sounding surprised as he hopped to his feet. "Who you calling a creep?" "You, that's who," said Obie. She sprang to her feet, brushing the dust off her fur. "How dare you tackle me like that?" "How dare you talk to me like that?" said the old mouse, all in a huff. "I just saved your life, kid." "What are you talking about?" said Obie. "You know that box you were about to step into?" said the old mouse. "Yeah? What about it?" "It's a trap." "A trap?" said Obie. "That's how much you know. It's got my absolute favorite cheese inside it, cheddar cheese." "Cheddar cheese, my whiskers," said the old mouse. "There's no cheese in that box. You were about to step into a trap, kid, a death trap." Obie was stunned. She stared in horror at the old mouse. "A death trap?" The old mouse nodded. "The floor of that box is covered with sticky glue. If you had stepped into that box, you never would have stepped out." Shocked, Obie stared at the box. She placed her paw over her heart and cried, Who put that in the Armstrong's attic?" "Mr. Armstrong, that's who." "Rachel's father?" cried Obie, staring in disbelief at the old mouse. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh no," said the old mouse. "Then how come I saw him put it there with my own 2 eyes?" "Maybe it was someone else. He's tall, wears glasses, kind of a funny nose, always looks like he needs a haircut. That was Mr. Armstrong, all right." Obie felt so confused. Why would Mr. Armstrong do such a thing? How could he be so cruel? Obie suddenly felt faint, almost dizzy. She leaned back on the side of the old toaster to steady herself. "Hey, you okay?" asked the old mouse, eyeing Obie with a look of concern. I feel a little faint," confessed Obie. "Well, considering you haven't eaten in days, that's not surprising." Obie stared at the old mouse. "How did you know that?" "Look how skinny you are," said the old mouse. "It's obvious you haven't been eating." Obie nodded. "Well, it's true. I haven't had any food in days, nor water. I'll be okay in a minute. Here, lean on me." As the old mouse came to Obie, she noticed he walked with a limp. The old mouse helped Obie over to a plastic orange cup that was lying on its side. It was a human toddler's tippy cup that was missing its top. Evidently, the cup must have fallen out of one of the boxes in the attic. The old mouse turned the cup upside down so Obie could sit on it. "Stay here," he ordered. "I'll be right back." "Where are you going?" "Just stay here." As Obie watched, the old mouse limped over to a bunch of brown boxes that said "Fragile" in red letters along their sides. He disappeared down a narrow alleyway between 2 of the boxes. Alone, Obie glanced about the dark, cluttered attic. Her gaze fell upon the small, rectangular, open-ended box, that dangerous, evil death trap that sat on the floor not far away, beckoning with its cheesy aroma. Obie shuddered to think how close she had come to stepping inside it, into her own death. And to think Rachel's own father would have been the cause. To take her mind off death traps and horrible death, Obie turned and peered in the other direction. Her eyes focused on the old toaster. She saw her reflection in the shiny metal side of the appliance. She gasped at the sight of herself. Oh my gosh! Look how scrawny I've become. In all likelihood, Obie, at this point, would have gotten all stressed out and wrung her paws in despair at how perfectly dreadful she looked. But just at that moment, she heard a noise up by the small square window behind her. It was a loud, scratchy sort of noise. Obie turned and, peering up at the window, spotted a twitching tail of gray, feathery fur. No doubt who that was. It was that nutcase, the gray squirrel. He was on the uppermost part of the Armstrong's roof, apparently looking for acorns. The squirrel's head abruptly popped up in one of the dirty window panes. He had an acorn stuffed in his mouth. He started to turn to go when his eye caught sight of Obie in the attic. Startled, the squirrel did a double take. He looked terrified. His eyeballs bulged, his jaw dropped open, and the acorn dropped out of his mouth. Why did he look so frightened? Obie wondered. It's just me. And then Obie remembered the conversation she had had with the squirrel the day before, and how he thought she was in jail. Oh no, thought Obie. That goofy squirrel thinks I've busted out of my cage. He must think I'm an escaped convict. Obie heard a shuffling sound over by the stack of boxes. It was the old mouse emerging from the shadowy alleyway. Obie saw the squirrel's gaze shift from her to the old mouse. The squirrel's eyes grew even larger and more terrified. He abruptly whirled about and leaped from the window, vanishing from view. Obie couldn't figure out why the squirrel was so scared to see a little old mouse. Then it dawned on her that if the squirrel thought she was an escaped convict, he must think the old mouse was part of her criminal gang. He probably thought he'd stumbled upon their secret hideout. The old mouse had not seen the squirrel. He bobbed toward Obie, carrying something in his mouth. It was a big, brownish-white clump of, well, Obie wasn't quite sure what it was. When the old mouse got to Obie, he stopped, took the clump out of his mouth, broke off a small piece and held it out to Obie. Here, eat this, he said. What is it? Asked Obie. Bread. Bread, cried Obie excitedly. She grabbed the small piece out of the old mouse's paws and bit into it. She nearly broke a tooth. The bread was as hard as a rock. Sorry, it's a little stale, said the old mouse. Who cares, cried Obie, chewing. At least it's food. Thank you so much. Wow, you really are hungry, said the old mouse as he watched Obie gobble down the rest of the small piece of bread. Instead of giving Obie another small piece, the old mouse just handed her the entire scrap of bread, crust and all. Sorry it's not cheddar cheese, he said. That's my absolute favorite cheese, too. Cheddar cheese would be nice, but this bread is just what I need at the moment, said Obie. It tastes so good. As Obie noisily chomped on the stale bread, she peered at the old mouse and said, So, who are you anyway? The name is Malcolm Dickens. What are you doing in the Armstrong's attic, Mr. Dickens? This is my home, replied the old mouse. You mean the Armstrong's home, don't you? Said Obie. No, my home, said the old mouse gruffly. I was here long before the Armstrongs ever moved in. You were? The old mouse nodded. Used to be a thriving colony of mice that lived in this house. What happened to them? They got killed off, said the old mouse. Well, all but me. That's terrible, exclaimed Obie. Who killed them? The Armstrongs, said the old mouse bitterly. The Armstrongs? Said Obie aghast. Not Rachel. She would never do such a thing. Well, no, not her. But her father and her brother did. Mrs. Armstrong? Said Obie incredulously. She was having enough trouble accepting the fact that Mr. Armstrong would do such a terrible thing as set out a death trap. But Mrs. Armstrong, too? "You know those 3 cats," said the old mouse. "You mean Sugar Smacks, Honey Buns, and Sweetie Smoochkins? Yeah, them," said the old mouse, his voice dripping with scorn. "You know why Mrs. Armstrong got them?" Obie shook her head. "To get rid of the mice." "Really?" said Obie. "I've always wondered why she got those cats." "That's why," said the old mouse. He heaved a deep, sad sigh. "Now I'm the only one left." "I'm sorry," said Obie. She reached out and gently put her paw on the old mouse's shoulder to comfort him. A dramatic change came over the old mouse. His face hardened. His beady little eyes narrowed to slits. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm getting my revenge. Now I torment them." "Torment who?" asked Obie, startled by this abrupt change in the old mouse's demeanor. He sounded bitter, very bitter. She removed her paw from the old mouse's shoulder. "The Armstrongs," said the old mouse. "I drive them crazy, especially Mr. Armstrong." "How do you do that?" asked Obie. She didn't like the way the old mouse had begun to talk. He spoke with such vengeance, such hate. It really frightened Obie. "I lurk in the shadows and then scurry out so they see me just for a split second out of the corner of their eyes. But when they turn to take a closer look, I'm gone." The old mouse, looking rather gleeful, rubbed his front paws together and let out a fiendish chuckle. "It drives them nuts. They don't know if I exist or not. That's why Mr. Armstrong put out that death trap. He's hoping to catch me, but he never will. I'm much too smart for him." Obie did not like the direction the conversation had taken. She decided it was time to change the subject. "Well, this has been a delicious meal," she said. "I can't tell you how hungry—" The old mouse suddenly held up his paw. "Shh! Listen." She stopped chewing and listened. She didn't hear anything, though. "What is it?" she asked. "I heard a dog bark downstairs. Music boy must be here." "Music boy?" said Obie, puzzled. "The kid with the earphones." "Oh, you mean Tad," said Obie. She laughed at the thought of the old mouse calling him Music boy. Obie made an attempt at a joke. "He wears those earphones so much it's amazing they don't get stuck in his ears." The old mouse did not chuckle, though. Didn't even smile or look amused. "Hear that?" he said. "Now the cats are meowing." "The cats always meow when Music boy arrives," said Obie. The old mouse got to his feet and said, "Come on." "Where are we going?" asked Obie, who, to be perfectly honest, would have preferred to sit and eat a bit more of the stale bread. "Follow me," ordered the old mouse, as limping, he hurried behind a pair of old black ski boots that sat near one of the 2 sloping walls that gave the attic ceiling its upside-down V shape. Chapter 21, The Secret Passageway. "What's back here?" asked Obie, as she hurried to keep up with Mr. Dickens. For an old mouse with a limp, he certainly moved fast. It was so dark behind the ski equipment and all the big cardboard boxes, it was hard to see. Obie stopped. The old mouse had vanished. "Mr. Dickens?" asked Obie, as she glanced about the shadowy darkness. "I'm here." Strangely, it sounded like the old mouse's voice had come from within the wall. Straining her eyes, Obie noticed a small black smudge upon the dark wall by the floorboards. Looking closer, Obie saw that the smudge was a little hole. "Are you in the wall, Mr. Dickens?" "Yes, now get in here." Obie wasn't sure if she should enter or not. More than once she had heard both Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong tell Rachel that she should always be careful around strangers. She should never, for instance, get into a stranger's human mobile. Mr. Dickens was a stranger, but he also had saved Obie's life and fed her. It seemed to Obie that if he was going to try any funny business, he probably would have tried it by now. More to the point, Mr. Dickens had a limp, was rather elderly, and, being a mouse, was smaller than Obie. She was reasonably sure that if Mr. Dickens misbehaved or tried to harm her, she would be able to handle herself. Still, she would be on her guard at all times. "What's in here?" asked Obie, as she cautiously stepped through the hole. In the darkness she spotted the small, hunched-over form of Mr. Dickens. He was waiting for her under one of the splintery timbers that supported the Armstrong's roof. "It's a secret passageway," replied Mr. Dickens. The old mouse turned and, limping, began to lead the way through the dark passageway. "This is so cool," cried Obie. "A secret passageway in the Armstrongs' house. Who knew?" "Nobody knows about it but me," said the old mouse. "And now me," thought Obie. "Where does it lead to?" she asked. "It goes all over the house." "Cool." "Cool?" said the old mouse. "You sound like a human." He said it in a very nasty, contemptuous tone of voice. Clearly he did not think much of one of Rachel's favorite expressions. "Oh, sorry," apologized Obie. She made a mental note to herself not to use the word cool again in front of the old mouse. "I have a tube. You know, a tunnel," said Obie, as she followed the old mouse past a strip of drooping fiberglass insulation that sagged from the ceiling. "But it's not like this, not at all. This is amazing. Hey, what are these drawings on the walls?" She had noticed some primitive stick figure drawings on the old timbers that they were hurrying past. The drawings, which looked as if they had been made with crayons, were of mice and humans. The mice were shown running away from the humans, who were armed with brooms and looked like ugly monsters. "Those were made long ago by my ancestors," said the old mouse. "Gosh, they look like cave paintings." "Cave paintings?" said the old mouse, peering quizzically at Obie over his shoulder. "Oh, Mr. Armstrong once read a book about them to Rachel," explained Obie. "Since my cage is in Rachel's bedroom, I got to listen." The old mouse abruptly stopped and whirled about. "Listen, kid," he said. "Let's get one thing straight. You're a rodent, not a human." "I know I am," said Obie. "You don't sound like you know." "Well, I do," insisted Obie. "I know I'm a gerbil, honest." "Okay, keep your voice down," said the old mouse, as they continued on their way through the dark tunnel, which had begun to slope downward. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" "The kitchen." Obie gasped. She was horrified. We're going into the kitchen? But that's where the cats are." "Hey, keep your voice down, will ya?" whispered the old mouse sternly. "We're not going into the kitchen. We're just going to observe." "Observe?" whispered Obie, puzzled. "From where?" "From here," said the old mouse. He stopped in front of a little hole in the wall. It was a tiny hole, just big enough, really, for a small mouse to crawl through. "There they are," the old mouse whispered, peering through the hole, his face lit by the light from the kitchen. Obie crammed her head into the hole too and peeked out. Sure enough, there were sugar smacks, honey buns, and sweetie smoochkins. The three cats were by the big white plastic garbage can with their backs to them. Each cat was eating from a small bowl. Evidently, Tad had just fed them. As Sugar Smacks was munching on her dry cat food, she turned her head and peered in the direction of the hole, as if she knew she was being observed. Obie quickly ducked her head out of sight. "Don't worry," whispered the old mouse. "The cats have no idea we're here. They're so clueless." "Where are we?" asked Obie. "I mean, I know we're in the kitchen, but where?" "By the stove," replied the old mouse. "Wow, this is so—" Obie was about to say cool again, but she caught herself just in time. "Neat." "I wonder where Music Boy is," muttered the old mouse. Then to Obie he said, "Come on." Limping, Mr. Dickens hurried through the secret passageway with Obie right behind him. They came to another little opening. The old mouse and Obie peeked out of the hole. They were now in the TV room. Obie saw Mac, Mr. Smithers, and Betsy and Susie, the goldfish. Evidently, Tad had already been here, too, for all the pets were eating. Mac sat on his bed, chomping on a dog biscuit. Mr. Smithers was in his cage, nibbling on a soot cake. And the goldfish were darting about in their aquarium, gobbling up the flakes of fish food that floated on the surface of the water. "Not here, either," said the old mouse. "He must be up in Craig's bedroom." Obie, horrified, stared at the old mouse. "We're not going there, are we? Craig has two dangerous pets, a snake and a tarantula." The old mouse scoffed. Those losers, they don't scare me." Mr. Dickens swung about and headed back through the passageway in the direction they had come. At one point, the passageway split into two directions. The old mouse scurried into the passageway that sloped upward. "Where's this other tunnel go?" Obie asked. "To the downstairs hallway," replied the old mouse. "It comes out behind the old grandfather clock." "Really?" said Obie in surprise. She had rolled past the old grandfather clock in her gerbilmobile a zillion times. Not once had it ever occurred to her that a little mouse hole might be nearby. "Come on, move faster," said Mr. Dickens impatiently. "You run faster on your exercise wheel." "How do you know about my exercise wheel?" asked Obie, as she hurried to keep up with Mr. Dickens. The old mouse was in such a hurry, though, he didn't respond. The secret passageway brought them back upstairs, and then it split into two again. Mr. Dickens took the passageway that led off to the right. They passed another little peephole. "This looks out to the upstairs hallway," said the old mouse. "What about this hole?" asked Obie, as they approached another hole farther down the passageway. She stopped and peeked out of the small opening. To her total astonishment, she found herself gazing into Rachel's bedroom. It was a spectacular view from somewhere near the bedroom closet. "Hey, I know this room," said Obie. "Come on," said the old mouse, sounding even more impatient, if such a thing was possible. "Stop dawdling." As Obie pulled her head from the hole, she realized something. She was surprised she hadn't figured it out sooner. "You're the one who's been spying on me, aren't you?" The old mouse did not respond. He just continued hobbling down the shadowy passageway. "It is you, isn't it?" "I watch everyone," grumbled the old mouse. "Nothing happens in this house without my knowledge." "I knew I was being watched," said Obie, as she caught up with the old mouse. They came to another little hole. The old mouse and Obie stuck their heads into the hole and gazed out. They were looking out into Craig's darkened bedroom. "Well, we found Music Boy," said the old mouse. They sure had. The teenage boy was standing by Craig's desk. On the desk sat two aquariums, one large, one small. The large aquarium was the snake's home. The smaller one belonged to the tarantula. Tad had taken Boa, the corn snake, out of his aquarium and was playing with him. He had the snake wrapped around his neck. The snake's face was just inches from Tad's face. "Ew!" cried Obie, shuddering. "How disgusting!" Obie put her paws over her eyes so she wouldn't have to see, but only for a second. Disgusting as the sight was, it was still pretty amazing to be able to see this without anyone knowing you were there. "This secret passageway is so cool, Mr. Dickens," whispered Obie. The moment she said it, she realized her mistake. She had used the cool word again. She pulled her head out of the hole and placed both front paws over her mouth. The old mouse visibly cringed. He didn't say anything, though. He continued to watch Tad for a bit longer, and then he, too, pulled his head from the hole. "Let's go back to the attic," he said. "It's time for your indoctrination." The next chapter, chapter 21, is called The Indoctrination. I wonder what that means. I wonder what Mr. Dickens and Obie are going to do. If they'll be friends, or what'll happen. We'll find out next week. I hope you enjoyed our reading this week. I'll read with you next week. Bye-bye.